Chapter 4, A Worried Husband. That evening, as the black SUV pulled into the Lancaster estate, Morgan and Jake stepped out into the fading light of early evening. The front doors opened before they could ring the bell. Nan stood waiting in the foyer, flanked by two of the younger housemaids. All three looked uneasy, hands clasped, eyes downcast. Morgan immediately noticed. "What is it?" Nan hesitated, glancing nervously at Jake before clearing her throat. "Well, you see, Master, something happened this afternoon. With the madam." Morgan's expression sharpened. "What kind of something?" "She was asleep in the living room," one of the maids added softly. "At first, everything seemed fine. But then she started crying in her sleep, with her eyes wide open. We thought it was some kind of episode." Nan stepped in again, her voice low. "When we tried to wake her, she reacted violently. It was like she didn't recognize anyone. I tried to calm her down, but..." Morgan didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already moving through the hall, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Jenny was upstairs in their bedroom, still in the silk robe, curled up on top of the blankets like she hadn't moved all day. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of the door. "Morgan," she mumbled, her voice hoarse, unfocused. He sat beside her, brushing a hand across her clammy forehead. "You're burning up." "I just need to sleep," she whispered. "I'm so tired." Morgan's brows drew together, concern tightening in his chest like a vice. "You said you didn't remember last night. Now the staff says you had another episode. You need help, Jen." Downstairs, Jake made his way to the security control room in the West Wing, logging into the main console. He fast-forwarded to the early afternoon footage from the living room camera. At first, nothing seemed off, just Jenny asleep, curled up peacefully on the sofa. Then it started. The stillness broke with trembling. Her face contorted in silent emotion. Her eyes opened but stared past everything. The crying began, soft, eerie, like something was breaking inside her. Jake watched as Nan approached and gently tapped her shoulder. The next second was chaos. Jenny jerked up like she'd been electrocuted, eyes wild, body defensive. Her hands flew up, shoving Nan back hard as she gasped for air. The staff froze. Jenny looked lost. Disoriented. Frightened. Jake replayed the scene twice. His jaw clenched. Back upstairs. Morgan looked up when Jake entered the bedroom, face grim. "You need to see this," Jake said quietly, holding out his phone with the footage queued up. Morgan watched in silence, his expression hardening with each second. When it ended, he stood without a word and grabbed his phone. He dialed Dr. Reyes immediately. "She had another night terror," Morgan said flatly. "And it's worse than last time. I'm bringing her in tomorrow. I want the sleep study done." Dr. Reyes didn't argue. "I'll have a room ready." Morgan's eyes shot open, heart pounding in his chest. He had been deep in sleep, but the sound of Jenny's crying shattered the quiet of the night. It was a soft, desperate sobbing, and it came from the far side of the room. His gaze immediately snapped to the corner, where Jenny wasn't lying in bed beside him like usual. Instead, she was curled up on the floor in a fetal position, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, and her arms wrapped around her legs as if trying to hold herself together. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, but vacant, empty, as though she wasn't seeing him. Tears streamed down her face, and her body trembled uncontrollably. "Jenny," he whispered, but she didn't respond, didn't even flinch at the sound of his voice. His stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. He slowly pushed himself out of bed, his mind racing with the warning Dr. Reyes had given him, "Don't wake her up." But Morgan's panic was rising with every second. He could see the distress in Jenny's body language, the way she was shaking, the way her sobs were getting louder but more incoherent. Taking a deep breath, Morgan stepped cautiously toward her, trying not to startle her further. He reached out, his hand just barely brushing her arm, skin to skin. Jenny's body jerked violently at the touch, and her eyes snapped open, wide with terror. A scream ripped through her throat, raw and filled with pain, as blood began to trickle down her legs. Morgan's breath hitched in his throat. Her scream was the last straw. Panic overtook him as he scooped her up, holding her close to his chest despite the blood soaking through her nightgown. "Jenny," he shouted, desperate. "Someone get the car. Now." His voice was frantic, but all he could focus on was her, the way she trembled in his arms, and the blood staining the fabric beneath her. As if the mansion was waking up from a deep slumber, the staff quickly mobilized. A small group of them gathered in the hallway, their faces filled with confusion and fear, but they wasted no time, rushing to follow Morgan's commands. The driver was called, and the car was readied. Morgan's heart raced as he carefully navigated the stairs, trying to keep Jenny as steady as possible. Her sobs were soft, her body still rigid in his arms, and her eyes were wide open, but the gaze remained unfocused, lost in whatever nightmare had a hold of her. The mansion, once calm and silent, felt like it was buzzing with energy now as everyone scrambled to get them to the car. Morgan's mind was running in overdrive. Is this from the night terrors? Is it something worse? He didn't know, but he didn't have time to figure it out. He needed to get her to the hospital, fast. He settled her carefully into the car, his hands shaking, and told the driver to speed toward the hospital. As the mansion lights faded behind them, Morgan's heart clenched. The only thing he could do now was hold on to her, and hope they got there in time. The emergency room doors burst open as Morgan carried Jenny in his arms, her silk nightgown stained dark with blood. Nurses and attendants rushed forward, guiding him toward a gurney as a team of doctors began barking orders. "She's bleeding, first trimester," Morgan choked out, his voice tight with panic. "She's been having episodes. Night terrors." Dr. Reyes appeared moments later, already pulling on gloves. "Bring her in. Or two is prepped. Morgan, we'll take it from here." Jenny's eyes were open, glassy, and unfocused. Her body trembled as the staff surrounded her, wheeling her away. Morgan's hands slipped from hers as the gurney vanished down the corridor, the sound of urgent footsteps and medical jargon echoing in his ears. It was early morning when Dr. Reyes finally emerged from the operating room. His expression was grim. "She's stable now," he said, his eyes dropping. "But I'm afraid the baby didn't make it." Morgan felt like the floor shifted beneath him. "What happened?" "Her body was under extreme stress," Dr. Reyes explained. "The repeated interruptions to her sleep, especially during night terrors, took a toll. She hasn't been able to reach restorative sleep in days. That stress combined with the pregnancy, it was too much." Morgan swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What do we do now?" "We find out what's causing this," Dr. Reyes said, his tone sharp with urgency. "We're admitting her to the sleep lab. We need to monitor her brain activity during sleep." Inside the sleep lab, Jenny lay motionless on the bed. The anesthesia had worn off, and as she woke, she became aware of the cold wires attached to her scalp. The sterile, dim room was unfamiliar. She stirred. "Where am I?" Dr. Reyes approached calmly. "You're safe. You're in the hospital. We ran some tests while you were asleep." "Jenny. I'm sorry. You lost the baby." Jenny's eyes widened, and her body tensed, but no words came. Just silence. From the observation room, Morgan stood behind the one-way mirror, fists clenched, heart hollow. He watched her silently, consumed with guilt. "I want you to take over at the office," he said over the phone to Jake. "I'm not leaving this hospital until we figure this out." That night, as soon as Jenny drifted off naturally, no sedation, no medication, the first episode began. Her body curled, her eyes flew open, and she began to cry silently, not blinking, not reacting. Alarms began to blip gently as the EEG readings spiked erratically. "She's in REM but displaying signs of intense emotional activity," the neurologist said, pointing at the screen. "This isn't typical. The amygdala's off the charts. And look here," activity in the hippocampus is irregular. Dr. Reyes narrowed his eyes. Memory suppression, this suggests she's repressing something. Something significant. They showed the results to Morgan. She's traumatized, Dr. Reyes said carefully. We believe she's suppressing a deeply distressing memory. Possibly even dissociative in nature. No, Morgan shook his head. The only traumatic event I can think of is her first miscarriage. After that, I told her to stop working, just stay home. That might be part of the problem, the neurologist countered. Isolation can be devastating, especially following loss. Left alone with her thoughts, with no outlet or support, it could have deepened into depression. That might have been the trigger for the overdose attempt. We recommend she sees a therapist, Dr. Reyes added. But when they informed Jenny, she immediately went cold. Her body stiffened, and her voice hardened. There's nothing wrong with me, she said defensively. Jenny, Morgan said softly, we're just trying to help you get better. You want to help me? She snapped. Then stop seeing that woman. This isn't about Celine. This is about you, Morgan said. There's nothing wrong with me, Morgan. You just want an excuse. If you want to be with her, just ask for a divorce. Don't build a case. For the last time, he said through clenched teeth, I am not having an affair. An affair doesn't have to be physical, Morgan, she spat. Ever heard of emotional infidelity? I'm not crazy. You're just trying to manipulate me. That night, when they returned home, she refused to sleep in the same room. You get your wish, she said, gathering a blanket and pillow. I won't sleep beside you anymore. She left, closing the door behind her with a quiet, final click. The next day, the staff found Jenny unconscious near the second-floor balcony of the mansion. Oh my God, madam, one of them gasped, rushing over to her. Security footage from the previous night revealed something chilling. Jenny had been sleepwalking, crying throughout the night while standing, before she finally collapsed in the early hours of the morning. Her body had given in to exhaustion. The footage showed her trembling and disoriented, her movements erratic as she wandered through the halls. Jenny slowly woke up, groaning softly as she shifted on the floor. She blinked at the concerned faces around her. I feel like I've been hit by a car, she muttered, but as she sat up, she noticed something surprising. She actually felt rested for the first time in a long while. Despite the strange circumstances, her body felt lighter, as if it had caught up on much-needed rest. But it wasn't exactly the restful night one would expect, especially after the chaos that had come before it. The staff watched her warily as she swayed, attempting to regain her balance. Their concern was evident. Was she truly okay? Jake arrived early at the mansion and overheard Nan, the elderly woman who had cared for the family for years, giving advice to Morgan. You need to focus on her, sir. Don't make things worse by letting Celine get in the way, Nan said, her voice filled with a hint of wisdom that only years of experience could bring. The staff then filled Jake in on what happened that night and the strange occurrence in the early hours of the morning. Jenny, now awake, was walking slowly around the room, her movements sluggish, but she hadn't seemed to realize just how much damage the sleepwalking had caused. As they all talked, Jake couldn't shake the concern over the situation, knowing that this wasn't just a simple medical issue anymore. There were deeper layers to the tension in the house. Later, in the car as they drove to work, Morgan asked Jake for his opinion on the situation. Jake, Morgan said, his voice low and serious, about the emotional affair, what do you think? Jake hesitated before responding. He wanted to be respectful but knew he needed to speak his mind. Well, sir, I have to ask. Is there something going on between you and Celine? Morgan's eyes briefly flicked to the side, his expression tightening. Mentally, he shut the thought down, quickly and decisively. Celine is just a friend, he said firmly. Jake wasn't entirely convinced. Well, you don't take your wife to events, do you? Jake pressed, leaning forward slightly. And honestly, a lot of the staff are starting to think that you and Celine are more than that, especially with how often you're seen together. Celine's social media, it's filled with photos that don't leave much to the imagination. Morgan clenched his jaw, trying to suppress his frustration. When is the next banquet? He asked, changing the subject, his tone clipped. This Saturday, sir, Jake replied quickly. Morgan's eyes narrowed, a plan beginning to form in his mind. Get Jenny something to wear. Jake raised an eyebrow, his voice light and teasing. You're not calling Miss Celine to help pick something out for her? Morgan's gaze turned icy. My wife's already accusing me of having an affair with her. Do you really think it's a good idea to ask Celine for anything right now? Jake immediately regretted his teasing. You're right, sir. I'm sorry. I'll take care of it. Morgan nodded once, his attention back on the road as the conversation ended. Jake fell silent, but the weight of the tension between the two men lingered. As much as he wanted to help, Jake could see the cracks beginning to form, not just in Jenny's mental health, but in Morgan's carefully constructed life. The wheels of tension continued to turn in the mansion, and the storm that had been brewing between them all was far from over. Jenny stood in the middle of the dressing room, holding the silk champagne off-the-shoulder gown like it was a loaded question. Her eyes didn't leave Morgan's face. What did you do? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Morgan shifted uncomfortably. What do you mean? Don't give me that. You never give me gifts unless you've done something wrong. That's not true, he said, forcing a chuckle. I give you gifts every time I close a deal. Jenny raised an unimpressed brow. This was chosen by Celine, wasn't it? Before Morgan could respond, Jake stepped in quickly, sensing the brewing storm. No, ma'am. Actually, I picked it out myself, with help from the store assistant. Mr. Lancaster didn't call Miss Celine. Jenny shot him a deadpan look. I would have appreciated it if my husband got it for me himself, she said without breaking eye contact with Morgan. There was a beat of silence. Then she continued, tone clipped, where are we going? There's going to be a banquet. A celebration for the start of the new project, Morgan replied. Jenny tilted her head slightly, as if scanning her mind. Or rather, Mandy scanning Jenny's memories. If Celine is going to be there, you go have fun, she said coolly. Morgan exhaled, already expecting resistance. The doctor said you need to get out. Not stay cooped up and stuck inside your head. Jenny's tone turned sharp. Am I going as your wife or as your date? Because as far as I remember, you never introduced me as your wife to your business partners. Come to think of it, wasn't it Celine who always accompanied you to these events? She gave him a once-over. You two have a fight or something? We are not having an affair, Morgan said through gritted teeth, jaw tightening. Jenny crossed her arms and stared. If I hadn't said anything, would you have stayed away from her? You keep insisting you're just friends, but have you ever stopped to consider that she might not see you that way? Morgan stayed silent. Jenny raised her phone. Since you're so blind, let me read you some of the messages she sent me. She tapped the screen and began reading in a flat voice, as if each word was a dagger. I know you're not right for him. You've always been too fragile. He needs someone who understands the pressure he's under. Someone who isn't falling apart every time life gets hard. If you truly love him, let him go. He deserves more than to play nurse to a woman who can't even show up for him in public. You're not the woman he married anymore, Jenny. I see it. He sees it. Even your staff sees it. But he won't leave you, not yet. He's too kind. That's why I'm here. Jenny looked up. Morgan's face had gone pale. She continued reading, slowly, emphasizing every line. I'm not the enemy here. I'm just making sure he's not alone through all of this. Someone has to keep him sane. Morgan couldn't look her in the eye. His voice dropped. Jenny. She interrupted with a sigh, closing her phone. I don't need you to defend her. I just need to know where you stand. He stepped forward. Please, just come with me to the banquet. It's not about her. I want them to see you, for who you really are. My wife. Jenny studied him for a long, tense moment. Finally, she said, "If I see that woman there, I'm out." Morgan nodded solemnly. "You won't." Jenny didn't reply. She walked toward the mirror and held up the dress. It was beautiful, but whether it would fix anything between them, neither of them knew. Morgan couldn't take his eyes off Jenny. The silk champagne gown clung to her figure in a way that made time slow around her. Her bare shoulders glowed under the warm light of the chandelier, and her long hair fell in soft waves down her back. Every step she took seemed to draw attention. Even Nan, usually composed and critical, blinked twice. "My God," one of the maids whispered in awe as Jenny descended the stairs. "She looks like a painting." Morgan swallowed hard, heart drumming against his chest. She didn't just look beautiful. She looked different. More poised. More alive. And for a moment, he could pretend everything was normal. Jenny smiled graciously at the compliments from the household staff, her usual shyness replaced by a serene confidence. As she reached Morgan, he offered his arm, which she accepted with a soft nod. Jake followed close behind them as they entered the banquet. Lights glittered across the ceiling like stars, and the murmur of powerful voices filled the air. But it was Jenny who captured attention. She didn't cling to Morgan's side or hover awkwardly like she used to. She mingled effortlessly with the wives and daughters of senators and CEOs, laughing gently, making sharp, witty comments, and politely dodging invasive questions with the grace of a practiced socialite. Morgan watched her from a distance, introducing her proudly to each of his partners. "This is my wife, Jenny," he said firmly, watching the way others reacted. Some were surprised. Jake slid beside him, sipping from a flute of champagne. "She's different." Morgan didn't answer. "She's more confident now," Jake continued, keeping his eyes on Jenny. "Before, she'd have been sitting in a corner, barely speaking. Now she's leading half the conversation. It's like," he glanced sideways, "like she's someone else." Morgan took a slow breath, eyes darkening. "I noticed," Morgan said quietly. "Not all of it's good." Jake frowned. "You mean the night terrors?" Morgan nodded. "I don't hear her crying every night anymore, but now, she screams in her sleep. Walks around like she's possessed. Last time, I found her unconscious near the balcony." Jake's eyes widened. "Shit. If I had to choose," Morgan sighed, running a hand through his hair, "I'd take the nightmares over watching her slowly fall apart. At least this version wants to live." Jenny didn't remember much of the ride home. The weight of the evening pulled at her eyelids. By the time they reached the house, she was swaying slightly in her heels. Morgan caught her hand gently. "Let's go to bed," he whispered. She nodded, not protesting as he guided her to the master bedroom. After helping her out of her gown and into one of his shirts, they washed up in quiet sync. But as she turned to leave the bed, he caught her wrist. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making sure you don't sleepwalk," he murmured, pulling her close. She was surprised by the tenderness in his voice. His arms wrapped around her tightly, anchoring her as they laid together. She could feel the beat of his heart against her back. Mandy, inhabiting Jenny's body, didn't protest. She knew he was afraid. Sometime in the night, the screams came. Morgan jolted awake to find Jenny trembling, eyes wide open but utterly silent, tears streaking down her face. Her lips quivered, but no sound came out. It was the same dream, the same fear. Something locked behind those eyes that didn't belong entirely to her. "Shoo," Morgan whispered, pulling her closer. "It's okay. I'm here." He patted her head gently, kissed her damp forehead, and ran his fingers through her hair until her body relaxed again. Slowly, her breathing returned to normal, and her eyes fluttered closed. By morning, Morgan awoke to find her still in his arms, her cheek resting against his chest. His pajama shirt was soaked with tears. He didn't remember falling back asleep, but he was relieved. At least she didn't walk toward the balcony again. Something was still wrong, but for the first time in a long time, they'd made it through the night. Together. Chapter 5, The Past. Morgan breathed a sigh of relief. For the past few weeks, Jenny had been stable, more than that, almost normal. She smiled at breakfast, helped Nan with the household schedule, and even took afternoon walks in the garden. From a distance, no one would suspect the quiet storm still brewing under the surface. But Morgan knew better. Every night, he held her close in bed, an unspoken ritual. If he let go, even for a moment, Jenny might rise in her sleep and start wandering. Once, she had crept toward the staircase, her eyes open but empty, and nearly tumbled down before collapsing just inches away. He had caught her just in time as the early dawn light filtered through the hall. After that, Morgan canceled his upcoming business trip. The thought of being away for days, leaving her unprotected, kept him up at night. And that decision didn't go unnoticed. It was Celine who came storming into his office the next morning. She didn't knock. She rarely did anymore. "This is getting ridiculous, Morgan," she snapped, tossing her designer bag on the couch. "You're skipping meetings. Delaying deals. For what? To babysit your wife?" Morgan didn't look up. He was reading over a quarterly report, jaw tight. "She's your wife, not your child," Celine scoffed. "Honestly, Jenny's a burden. Everyone in this building can see it." Slam. Morgan's palm crashed onto the desk, loud enough to rattle the glass water bottle and draw every eye from the open office outside. The staff paused mid-call, mid-keystroke, mid-whisper. Silence rippled through the floor. "You don't get to call her that," Morgan said, his voice sharp and breaking. "Things wouldn't have gotten to this point if you hadn't haunted her, sending those emails, those messages, tagging me in every post as if we were having an affair." Celine blinked, stunned. "Morgan, You wanted to ruin my marriage," he snarled. "You wanted her to see it. You knew what you were doing." She faltered, lips trembling. "I just don't want to see you suffer like this. You're taking over her family's business. You've got your father's company on top of that. And she can't even support you." "That's my job," he shouted. "That's my job as the head of the household. I married her knowing what came with it. I took vows. You don't get to decide what she's worth to me." Celine stood frozen. Then, in a weak, pathetic tone, she whimpered, "Morgan, I only wanted to help." "Help?" His voice dropped, dangerous. "If you want to help, then stay away from her. From me. From my life. Go ruin someone else's marriage." She stared at him, mortified. And then, with a sharp turn of her heel, she stormed out. The entire office followed her with their eyes as she made her way to the elevator, her heels clicking like gunshots against the tile. Down in the cafeteria, the gossip spread like wildfire. "Did you hear that shouting? What was that about?" Celine looked like she was about to cry. "Did something happen to the boss's wife?" "I heard she's been rushed to the hospital 3 times, someone whispered over their sandwich. "They say she has night terrors. Sleepwalks. Collapsed near the stairs once. That's why he won't travel anymore," another added. "He's scared to leave her alone." But before the gossip could go further, Jake walked in and dropped his tray loudly on the table. He glared at the group. "You think it's funny? Making someone's pain into your lunchtime entertainment?" The group went quiet. "Don't talk about the boss's family like it's a soap opera," Jake said. "If you really respected him, you'd shut your mouths and mind your own damn business." The silence afterward was heavy, and, for once, lasting. Because if there was one thing becoming clear to everyone around them, it was this. Whatever was happening with Jenny Lancaster, it was serious. Morgan barely had time to grab lunch before he was driven to the Collins Corporation for a business meeting. The hum of the car's engine did little to soothe his nerves. It had been a few years since he'd taken over the business after marrying Jenny, but the weight of the board's expectations still hung heavily on his shoulders. 6 years ago, when he first married Jenny, the board members had been highly suspicious. The old-timers and long-term investors, who had worked alongside Jenny's father, Mr. Collin, were particularly wary. They couldn't understand how a relatively unknown businessman like Morgan could suddenly become a key figure in the family-run company. After all, Jenny's father, Mr. Collin, had made grand plans for his daughter. He had intended to prepare her for college and eventually groom her to take over the business. However, Mr. and Mrs. Collin's tragic deaths before Jenny even turned 18 had thrown all their plans into disarray. Jenny was suddenly thrust into the responsibility of running a business she wasn't prepared for, and the board members immediately began eyeing the company with hopes of taking control. Board member, Mr. Carter. We always believed Mr. Collin's daughter would follow in his footsteps, but now, we have a young woman with no experience. At first, many of the shareholders thought they could take over the company by buying up the shares left behind by Mr. Collin and his wife. But they quickly discovered that Jenny's name was on everything, every share, every investment, and even the company itself. The money that had funded the company came from Mrs. Collin's parents, the James family, who were very protective of their daughter. They had made Mr. Collin sign a stringent prenuptial agreement before their marriage, making sure that the company would remain under the ownership of his wife and daughter. Despite Mr. Collin marrying above his station, he had agreed to every stipulation, and the company's affairs had been monitored closely by the James family until their deaths. Some of the board members speculated that Mr. Collin had planned to revise the division of assets, but he passed away unexpectedly in a plane crash before he could implement those changes. This left a grief-stricken 17-year-old Jenny with control over everything. At first, the board members considered letting the company go bankrupt, or even arranging a marriage between Jenny and one of their sons to secure control. However, everything changed when Morgan appeared just after Jenny's 18th birthday, with a marriage certificate in hand. No prenuptial agreement meant that anything Jenny owned was now considered marital property, including the company. The board saw Morgan's failing business, and they considered him untrustworthy. Some even planned to sue him in Jenny's behalf. However, Morgan's business skills quickly won them over. He turned the company around, and profits began to soar. Slowly, the board's resentment dissipated as they came to realize that Morgan was more than capable of running the company. His reputation as a businessman grew, and their trust in him became solid. Board member, Mr. James. Let's face it, Morgan. You've proven yourself. The numbers speak for themselves. But... He paused, casting a glance at the other board members. When can we expect an heir? This question, once a subtle concern, now became a regular topic of discussion in meetings. It was always the same: when would Morgan and Jenny have a child? The James family, in particular, was insistent, eager for some good news on that front. Morgan, now 29 years old, couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Jenny was 24, and they had been married for 6 years. While the company was thriving, this one issue, the question of an heir, remained a thorn in his side. He knew that the future of the business, the very legacy of the Collin family, depended on it. But how could he deliver something when Jenny, still grieving and coping with the weight of their past, was not ready for that kind of pressure? Morgan, leaning back in his chair, voice tight. We're working on it. But right now, I'm focused on making sure the company remains strong. An heir will come when it's right. The board members exchanged glances, but no one pressed further. They had learned over the years that Morgan's word was law when it came to the business. But the James family didn't let it go. Mr. James, quietly, as Morgan stood to leave. We just want to know that the company will continue on, Morgan. That's all we're asking. Morgan forced a smile, nodding curtly, but the weight of the question followed him out the door. He stepped into his car, his head spinning. The board was no longer an obstacle, but the pressure to secure the future of the business, through an heir, was always there. And the James family's expectation that he would deliver weighed more heavily with each passing year. As the car sped away from the building, Morgan rubbed his temples. He'd proven himself as a businessman, but the question of when would Jenny provide an heir was starting to gnaw at him, and the constant reminders from the board only added to the mounting stress. It was a headache he could never escape, and one that would likely linger as long as he was in charge of the Collin Corporation. Scene, car ride from Colin Corporation. Morgan loosened his tie and stepped into the back seat of the black town car, sinking into the leather seat as Jake closed the door behind him and took the passenger seat. The chauffeur pulled out of the Colin Corporation parking lot and into the main road. His phone buzzed. Housekeeper text, Mrs. Lancaster had lunch in the garden. She's now painting in the garden. The dog is with her. Morgan smiled, shoulders easing slightly. He could picture Jenny now, barefoot, wearing one of his old shirts over a dress, brush in hand, surrounded by warm sun and wildflowers. Jake glanced over. Good news? Morgan didn't look up. She's painting. Jake chuckled. Better than crying, yeah? Morgan exhaled. Much better. They were headed back to the Lancaster building, where Morgan still oversaw his family's company. Even though he ran both the Colin Corporation and the Lancaster enterprise, he insisted on keeping them separate. 6 years had passed since he married Jenny. He was now 29, she was 24. In that time, the once skeptical Colin board members had gone from plotting lawsuits to toasting his leadership. Their bitterness had long since faded, replaced by grudging admiration, especially after Morgan doubled the company's revenue within 3 years. Still, the one thing they never stopped pestering him about was an heir. Have you and Jenny considered? When can we expect? You're not getting any younger, Morgan. Even today, the chairman had pulled him aside on his way out. Tell Jenny the Jameses want a word. Or better yet, an announcement. The future of the company depends on a proper successor. Morgan rubbed his temple as the car stopped at a red light. I run 2 companies, he muttered. But sure, let's talk babies instead. Jake snorted. Should have known, Morgan added. That family only stops asking for a month after we send a fruit basket. Flashback, 6 to 10 years ago, Morgan's POV. People still talk. Boardroom whispers and gala gossip. No one ever says it to my face, of course, but I've heard the versions. How did he, Morgan Lancaster, the son of a disgraced businessman, land the richest heiress in the country? They say it was manipulation. Others think I seduced her. But the truth? It wasn't that neat. And it sure as hell wasn't my idea. My mother, Mrs. Lancaster, she's the one who knew how to survive a sinking ship. While my father drank away the last of our reputation, she stayed in the social scene, smiling, calculating. She saw the storm coming and made sure we had a raft. That raft turned out to be Jenny Colin. She started cozying up to Mrs. Colin years before the crash. They had nothing in common, except power and appearances. But my mother knew how to flatter a woman who prided herself on elegance and restraint. She's such a sweet girl, she'd say over tea. So quiet, so refined. Smart too. Reminds me of Morgan at that age. I never even noticed Jenny back then. She was just a kid, tagging along behind her mother at charity events. Quiet. Polite. Forgettable. Then the plane crash happened. Jenny was 17. Alone. Wrecked. And somehow, my mother became the one she clung to. The woman barely waited a week before bringing her into our home like she belonged there. Said it was what her parents would have wanted. But I knew my mother. I saw the way she watched Jenny. Not like a girl in mourning, but like an opportunity. A golden one. That's when Jenny started coming to me. Not often. Little things. Asking if I liked books. Music. My favorite films. I didn't think anything of it until my mother said, "She's grown quite attached to you." I laughed. Brushed it off. Until Jenny turned 18 and told my mother, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I want to marry Morgan. That's all I want for my birthday. I lost it. You can't be serious, I told my mother. I'm not marrying a girl just because she's rich and has a crush. She was calm. Cold. You'd be protecting her. Keeping the vultures away. You know how many men are lining up to take what her parents left behind? I'm not one of them. You wouldn't be taking anything, she said. You'd be securing your future. Hers too. And she adores you. Don't act like that doesn't matter. I walked out. Told her I wouldn't do it. And then, she made sure I didn't have a choice. Jenny's 18th birthday dinner was at our house. My mother planned every detail. The lighting. The wine. The guest list. I didn't even notice what she slipped into my drink. But the next morning, Jenny was in my bed. A few weeks later, she was pregnant. What followed was quiet. Fast. A ceremony with just enough witnesses to make it legal. I hated the headlines. The rumors. But I hated myself more for not walking away when I had the chance. They say time changes things. Maybe. Or maybe I just buried the guilt under work and routine. I never told Jenny the truth about that night. About how none of it was supposed to happen. Back to present day. The car slowed in front of the Lancaster building. Jake stepped out first, holding the door open like always. I followed, slower than usual. Eyes on the sky. Like it could give me an answer I hadn't found in years. Maybe it never will. Chapter 6. In the garden, Mandy painting, scanning Jenny's memories. The sun dipped lower across the sprawling garden, brushing the tips of the wildflowers with amber light. A breeze danced through the leaves, soft and harmless. Mandy dipped her brush into a pool of pastel pink and slid it across the canvas, but her mind wasn't in the painting. It was somewhere else, somewhere deeper. Jenny's memories flooded her like waves, uninvited but impossible to stop. Memory after memory. Grief. Loneliness. A marriage too fast. A mother-in-law too strategic. Mandy blinked at the garden, letting the tip of the brush hover midair. She had been trying to piece together the fragments of Jenny's life ever since she woke up in her body. But this was something else. Mrs. Lancaster. She was a fox wrapped in silk and perfume. In Jenny's memories, Mandy saw her, poised, cold-eyed, sympathetic on the surface but always calculating underneath. When Jenny lost her parents in that tragic crash, Mrs. Lancaster had been the first to show up. The first to hug her, to offer warm tea and soft words, to tuck her in on nights Jenny didn't want to return to an empty mansion. It would have been touching if it weren't so strategic. She saw the dinner, Jenny's 18th birthday. A night Jenny remembered fondly, but Mandy saw the edges now, sharp and wrong. Morgan had tried to decline the arranged dinner. He had argued with his mother behind closed doors. But by the end of that night, whatever was in that drink dulled his protests, and Jenny, already clinging to the Lancaster family like a lifeline, leaned in closer. She got pregnant. Mrs. Lancaster practically sealed the marriage certificate with a bow. Mandy leaned back on the garden bench, disgust curling in her stomach. The manipulation, the timing, the precision of it all, it was masterful. Horrifying. Impressive. God, your mother-in-law really was something else, she muttered under her breath. And Morgan? He went along with it. At first reluctantly. Later, diligently. He never touched the Collin Corporation's assets. Not a single coin was moved from Jenny's side of the empire to fund the sinking Lancaster business. Instead, he pulled his father's company back from the brink using his own skill, grinding for every deal, every partnership. Mandy rolled her eyes. Wow, martyr husband of the year. But that doesn't make him a saint. Because there was still Celine. Mandy didn't need much to see how Celine wormed her way into Morgan's orbit, how Jenny kept doubting herself, how everyone thought the marriage was just a stepping stone for him. And with Celine always conveniently at his side, how could Jenny not spiral? But what hit Mandy the hardest was the truth behind Jenny's first miscarriage. She hadn't known. Jenny had been trying to apply to university in secret. She wanted to prove that she could run the Collin Corporation like her father intended. She wanted to be more than just Morgan's wife. The stress wore her down. She lost the baby in the early weeks, barely the first trimester. The incident was swept under a rug. The hospital was paid off. By Mrs. Lancaster, of course. The Colin board had been itching for a scandal, any excuse to nullify the marriage and take control of the company. A miscarriage, especially one linked to stress or carelessness, would have been perfect ammo. Instead, Mrs. Lancaster made it disappear. And Jenny was left to suffer in silence. Mandy's brush paused again. That was the beginning of her depression. She stopped painting. Stopped applying to schools. Stopped fighting back. And while Morgan worked long hours, it was Mrs. Lancaster who sat with her, who reminded her to eat, who played piano on the rainy days when Jenny wouldn't get out of bed. Mandy had to admit, Mrs. Lancaster cared. Twisted as she was, she genuinely cared for Jenny. But then, she died. Months before Jenny's overdose, Mrs. Lancaster lost her battle to breast cancer. Morgan was busy, always busy. Jenny was left to visit her grave alone. No more late-night tea. No more hand to hold. Just silence. Day by day, Jenny began to vanish from her own body. Until Mandy woke up in it. She looked down at her own hands, Jenny's hands now, still stained with flecks of pink and green paint. Morgan never used her. He worked himself to the bone instead. He proved the doubters wrong. But in the end, none of that mattered. He left Jenny alone when she needed him most. And for that, Mandy couldn't forgive him. Not yet. She dipped her brush again, and started painting something new, something angry, something bold. Because if she had to live this life now, she wouldn't waste it like Jenny did. Mandy reading the video, the call, and Jenny's hidden past. The brush slipped from Mandy's fingers, landing with a soft thud in the grass beside her. Her heart pounded, not from the memory, not from the grief, but from the video that had just lit up Jenny's phone screen like a bomb. Slam. Morgan's voice echoed from the screen, loud and furious. You don't get to call her that. Mandy watched with wide eyes as the footage played out, Morgan slamming his palm on the desk, Celine flinching, the entire office holding its breath. His words hit hard, unforgiving. You wanted to ruin my marriage. You knew what you were doing. There was no denying it. He wasn't trying to gaslight or shift blame. He was angry, unfiltered, raw. And for the first time, Mandy saw something that didn't fit the version of Morgan she had decided to hate. He wasn't indifferent. He was protecting Jenny. Defending her. And then, ding, another notification. This time, it was a call. The contact read, Lorenzo James. Mandy blinked. That surname. James. Jenny's cousin. She answered. Congratulations, came the sly, amused voice on the other end. You finally won a battle against that woman. That woman? Mandy echoed, voice low with suspicion. Celine, he chuckled. That which has been a thorn in your side for years. But now? The entire country just watched her get humiliated by your husband. If Morgan keeps this up, we might consider loosening the restrictions on his company. Mandy's eyes narrowed. Restrictions? What do you mean restrictions? Oh, come on, Jenny, he said with a laugh. You think the Lancaster group kept stumbling for 6 years by accident? We just didn't trust him. Still don't, honestly, but he's learning how to act like a husband. Her breath caught. The layers were deeper than she thought. Then he added, voice playful, too casual. Besides, the board's been joking about how a baby might finally convince us he's serious. What do you think? Want us to nudge him in that direction? Mandy flushed, a stunned red creeping into her cheeks. She didn't know how to respond. He continued, breezily. And just so you know, Morgan never slept with Celine. She's just been orbiting him like a satellite. Pathetic, really. Now, should we make some trouble for her? Test Morgan's resolve a bit? Mandy blinked. How? Let us worry about the method, my dear. Just rest, and let the insurance policy do its work. And just like that, ping. The video of Morgan and Celine had gone viral. Caption: Supermodel tries to seduce married CEO, office meltdown caught on camera. Mandy stared at the screen, stunned. What the hell, she muttered, heartbeat quickening. The timing was too perfect. The video had barely aired, and it was already being spun for PR, insurance policy, he said. She set the phone down and closed her eyes, diving into Jenny's memories again. She needed answers. She found herself standing in a cold, echoing hall, the James residence. Jenny, still a teenager, sat on an ornate chair, stiff and terrified. The Jameses loomed over her, her grandparents, her uncles, Lorenzo, disappointed and furious. No prenup? Are you serious? He's going to drain your company. Mark my words. We should annul this marriage while we still can. Jenny had pleaded with them. But I love him, she said, her voice trembling. The room erupted in laughter. Love? Her grandfather scoffed. You're the heiress to a century-old empire. He's the son of a bankrupt factory owner. Then came the decision that set everything in motion. We'll test him. The board will give him hell. And let's see what he chooses, his family's dying legacy, or your empire. And they had done just that. Board meetings filled with cold glares and impossible expectations. Sudden legal freezes. Scandals they let spread. Lancaster's clients and partnerships slowly choked by invisible hands. But Morgan didn't abandon his family's company. He fought. Balanced both. Impressed even the skeptics, until Celine returned. Mandy opened her eyes and stared at the garden. The Jameses. The puppet strings. The corporate chessboard. And at the center of it all, a girl who just wanted to love and be loved. Jenny never had a chance. The Jameses, who owned the land her mansion was built on, the firms that handled her PR, and, as it turned out, the influence to throttle Morgan's business until they deemed him worthy, had controlled everything. And they still did. She leaned back, dazed. Morgan had been tested. Torn. And despite his flaws, despite Celine's hovering presence, he hadn't broken the way everyone expected. The Lancaster estate, late afternoon to nightfall. The golden glow of the late afternoon sun streamed into the hallway as Jake entered, balancing armfuls of canvases, boxed acrylic paints, high-end brushes, and palettes. The air smelled of pine wood and fresh paper. Mandy, still in Jenny's body, tilted her head in confusion. What's all this? Morgan stepped in behind Jake, looking just slightly out of breath, as if he'd rushed to get home. His usual stern face was softer now, eyes watching her carefully. I heard you've been painting again, he said. So. I decided to pick up a few things. Thought you might like them. She blinked, surprised. Thank you. He smiled. You're welcome. She stared at him, quiet, calculating, but also caught off guard by the gesture. No one had ever bought her art supplies before, not even in her own life. The memory in Jenny's mind didn't show Morgan as the type of man to notice things like that. You must be hungry, he said. Let's eat. As they sat at the dining table, with warm dishes and candlelight between them, Mandy kept her eyes on him. How was your day? She asked. Did you go to my company? It's doing fine. The quarterly earnings surpassed expectations. She nodded. And, how about your company? Morgan wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin and met her gaze. That new project we just signed? Operation Meridian? I sent one of my men to oversee it. I wanted to make sure it runs smoothly while I'm here. Mandy blinked, genuinely stunned. He sent someone else? In Jenny's memories, Morgan never delegated his personal projects. He would vanish for weeks, sometimes months, until everything was under control. And Jenny would be left alone. Always. You sent your own people? She asked, voice low with disbelief. Morgan leaned forward slightly, catching the hesitation in her tone. Yes, he said. Look, honey. I know I haven't really been here for the past few years. But you understand why, right? It's all been for the company. For us. But I'm done disappearing. I promise. From now on, I won't leave unless it's urgent. She stared at him, heart clenched, head spinning from memory and reality clashing. Really? She asked, not hiding the skepticism in her voice. Morgan didn't flinch. He reached for her hand across the table, threading his fingers with hers. Really? And then. Roaring. His phone lit up between them. Celine. Jenny's face hardened. Her jaw twitched. But Morgan looked down, sighed, and then, declined the call. A second later, with deliberate motion, he tapped twice and blocked the number. Mandy's breath hitched. She said nothing, just watched him silently set the phone aside. That night, the air between them changed. The bedroom, once a cold space full of memories Jenny had cried herself to sleep in, felt different. Morgan's hand brushed her cheek, tentative. His lips touched hers gently at first, then grew urgent. Sincere. When he whispered her name, it sounded like hers, not a memory, not a ghost. They made love. Slow, aching, like a man making up for every night he hadn't held her. For every time he'd let her go to sleep alone. And for the first time since Mandy woke up in Jenny's body. There were no night terrors. No flashes of blood or shadows or regret. There was only a dream. Her. Morgan. And 2 children running on a sunlit path, laughing, barefoot, happy. She woke up with tears in her eyes. And the terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, she was falling for a man who had once broken the heart of the girl whose body she now lived in. Morgan's POV. I woke to the soft warmth of her breath on my skin. Jenny's arm was draped across my chest, her face relaxed, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in months. The early morning sun filtered in through the curtains, and for a moment, I let myself believe this was how it was always supposed to be. Just us. No vultures. No companies. No expectations. But the guilt crept in before I could even exhale. She deserved better than what I'd given her, than how this all started. What kind of man allows his mother to orchestrate a marriage through manipulation? What kind of man doesn't stop it? I'd told myself I was protecting her from the board, from opportunists, from being swallowed whole by a world of suits and whispers. But somewhere in between deals and meetings, I'd become the very thing I swore I'd guard her against. I glanced down at her sleeping form, so soft, so breakable. Jenny had always been too innocent for the games the rest of us played. She thought marriage meant love, safety, forever. I gave her legal documents, press releases, and silence. I never even touched her company's money. Not once. Even though, by law, it became marital property. Even though she told me could. It was always about legacy for her, not profit. Not power. Just honoring her parents' memory. I remember the day I took over Colin Corporation. The way the old board members looked at me, like I was some stray dog who'd sniffed out a rich man's daughter and bit down hard. An opportunist. A parasite. They didn't see the sleepless nights I spent keeping her name afloat. They didn't care that I never touched her inheritance. They only wanted to see me fail, wanted proof that the pretty boy from a bankrupt house couldn't carry a dynasty on his back. And maybe they were right. I didn't notice when my wife started falling apart. Depression had crept into our home like mold in the walls, quiet, insidious. I didn't even realize how bad it had gotten until the night she collapsed outside our bedroom, blood running down her legs. Another miscarriage. Our second. The first, she never even told me about. I had to find out through hospital records buried under layers of silence and shame. She'd been applying for university. She didn't want to rely on me. On anyone. She was trying to prove she could run Colin Corp on her own. And now the board wanted us to try again. To have a child. As if that would fix everything. It's not that I don't want a child. I do. God, I do. But not if it breaks her. Not again. Not if every night becomes a war zone in her mind. Not if her body keeps paying the price for the pressure we keep putting on her. I turned and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. She didn't stir. I'm sorry, I whispered. Not just for last night, for all of it. For marrying her under a lie. For loving her too late. For choosing boardrooms over bedrooms and strategy over sincerity. But I would fix it. Even if it killed me.